Polls are closed in the legislative elections in Argentina. Violent groups belonging to the Cruceñista Youth Union in Bolivia have attacked a popular neighborhood in Santa Cruz and ratified the calls for a strike and protests. Bulgarians went to the polls to elect a new parliament and a new president amid a surge of coronavirus infections. Hello and welcome to teleSUR. I'm Santiago Loaiza in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. In Argentina, more than 34 million citizens went to the polls to elect 151 new legislators in an essential election for the country, which is on the road to recovery after being severely punished by the pandemic. Following an intense campaign and 2 very complex months, especially after primaries, in which the ruling party suffered a hard setback, voters will decide today how both houses of Congress will look like, when the renewal of half of the legislature and 1/3 of the Senate will take place, with a large deployment of more than 90,000 troops. The country will control general and health security mainly in the province of Buenos Aires, which has the largest number of voters. For the administration of President Alberto Fernández, this could be a defining election, since the majority he has so far in the upper house is at stake. More than 400,000 Argentinians have been voting abroad for hours now. President Alberto Fernández exercised his right to vote at a polling station located in Puerto Madero neighborhood. He pointed out that the electoral process was being carried out under normal conditions and with absolute calm.
What we ask the Argentinians the most is that they go and express themselves so we can build the country we want, and that is the objective. What we want is the people to express themselves today and do it with all their strength, with all their conviction.
Meanwhile, the candidates of Together for Change share their traditional breakfast at Croque Madame in Porteño neighborhood of Recoleta, led by the candidate for national deputy, María Eugenia Vidal, and the head of the government of Buenos Aires, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta. Vidal pointed out that if everyone listens to the people's vote, both the government and the opposition will be able to do their job well. Larreta exercised his right to vote after 9 o'clock at the law school and cautiously pointed out that the electoral ban must be respected. She also welcomed the correct functioning of the electoral day. Let's now review the context in which Argentinians arrived to these important elections.
This Sunday's elections are crucial for the stability of the ruling party's governance for the next 2 years. After losing the majority in 18 out of 24 districts in September's primaries, including the autonomous cities of Buenos Aires, President Alberto Fernández's coalition Front for All must strive to win the general legislative elections of November 14. The path to the elections has been marked by 3 main issues: the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the country's economic situation inherited from a previous administration, and the debts with the International Monetary Fund. During the Fernández administration, the Argentinian economy encountered the aftermaths of a pandemic, which caused it to drop by 9.9% in 2020, completing 3 years of recession. Despite this, Fernández administration has managed to halt COVID-19 contagions and fully vaccinate over 60% of the population. In regards to the IMF debt, President Fernández had this to say as the electoral campaign period came to a close.
Now we have to resolve the debt that they have left us with the International Monetary Fund. Of course, we have to resolve it. But I tell you, I am not going to solve it in 5 minutes, because whoever solved this problem in 5 minutes has given the fund the reason for everything they are asking for. And I give the reason to you, not to the fund. So I will take as much time as I need to find the best agreement for the Argentine people.
Following the results of the primaries in September, several government figures presented their resignations. The Minister of Interior, Minister of Science and Technology, the Minister of Justice, the Minister of Territorial Development and Habitat, the Minister of Culture, all presented their resignation, sparking then a situation of political crisis in Buenos Aires. The entire cabinet of ministers offered their resignation to Governor Axel Kicillof, the Executive Director of the National Social Security Administration, and the Executive Director of the State's Comprehensive Medical Care Program for retirees and pensioners also offered their resignation. Argentinian social movements led by Movimiento Evita expressed their support to President Alberto Fernandez amid the internal crisis that broke out among the different sectors that make up the government coalition. They mobilized under the slogans Fuerza Alberto and for the unity of the Front for All. Over 101,000 polling stations are open for Argentinians to vote. The nation's foreign ministry said more than 385,000 Argentinian citizens abroad can exercise their right to vote in these elections. Polls open at 8 a.m. local time and will close at 6 p.m. local time. However, if any voter is inside a voting center or outside in line after the closing hour, he or she will be able to vote. Results are expected to be very close in these elections. The opposition, Together for Change Alliance, seeks to control the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate in the second half of President Alberto Fernandez's term of office.
Así que me tomaré el tiempo que haga falta para encontrar el mejor acuerdo para los argentinos y las argentinas.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. In Bolivia, in spite of the agreements of the abrogation of Bill 1386, approved by President Luis Arce, violent groups belonging to the Cruceñista Youth Union, a violent opposition organization, have attacked a popular neighborhood in Santa Cruz and ratified the calls for a strike and protests. The incidents are reported in the area known as the Plan 3000, a housing development made up mostly of Bolivians from the Altiplano. According to the complaint filed by members of the Movement Towards Socialism, a group of dozens of people, identified as a part of the opposition Santa Cruz Youth Union, attacked neighbors, leaving several injured in an atmosphere of violence and racism. Hours before, local residents had publicly expressed their opposition to the decision to sustain the strike called by the Santa Cruz Civic Committee, despite the abrogation of Bill 1386.
We categorically reject the attitude of Rómulo Calvo, another one that becomes an enemy of the people of Santa Cruz, because he hires the Palomillos, he hires the Maleantos, to edit what is a criminal civic strike that at this moment is massacring the people of Santa Cruz. For that reason, we reject categorically his action. The population is in a state of emergency. We reject what is a criminal civic strike.
Now we move on to Peru. The government of President Pedro Castillo has set itself the goal of obtaining concrete results in the dialogue between employers and workers after a layoff imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to accomplish this, the government has reactivated the National Employment Promotion Council. To this end, the president held an event at the government's house where he urged the sides of his social labor dialogue to maintain the will to bring welfare to all Peruvians. The president asked businessmen not to echo the campaign of lies against them and to invest in the country, thus generating jobs and conditions necessary for the legalization of investments. In the middle of the critical moment experienced at Ecuador's prisons, inmates of 2 prisons started a hunger strike due to the extreme insecurity they live in, and in solidarity with those who died this Friday in the prison of Guayaquil, after a deadly riot that left 68 people dead and severely injured. Prisoners from the detention center in Azuay and Cotopaxi provinces made the decision, which was later confirmed by the National Service for the Imprisoned of Ecuador, who reported that a group of people refused to eat food in protest. From inside the correctional facility, several inmates sent messages through social media networks requesting help from the authorities, as well as video and images that show the complex scenario experience and even some of the murders. In Honduras, Francisco Gaitan, mayor of the municipality of Cantarranas, was killed this Saturday. During a rally, preliminary information indicates that a man shot the politician who was running for re-election for the upcoming November 28th general elections. According to a preliminary police report, Gaitan was on a political campaign in San Luis when he was shot by a drunk man. He was later arrested by sympathizers of the Liberal Party and handed over to police agents. The death of Francisco Gaitan occurred when he was in the middle of the campaign for the elections to be held in 2 weeks, with the participation of 14 other political parties. Hundreds of citizens from Cantarranas took to the streets to protest the crime and to demand justice. The presumed murderer, named Wilfredo Velázquez, is in the custody of the police, who are carrying out the pertinent investigations. Today in Havana, the initiative of hundreds of young people who oppose the practices of unconventional warfare promoted by the United States government against the island comes to an end. The movement, known as the Red Handkerchiefs, declared themselves defenders of life, equality, and sovereignty. The media does not talk about much of those. They do not mention their peaceful sit-down, much less their demands or the way in which they are affected by the sanctions imposed by Washington. Since last Friday, they have peacefully taken Havana's Central Park to demonstrate their rejection to the blockade, which they consider a violation of their human rights. These young people support the emancipatory struggles and the commitment with a perfectible socialism. The group also includes students, workers, housewives, and members of the LGBTQ community, who through a number of acts demand the right to a life in peace.
And we came out to the streets because today we have something sacred to defend, which is the quiet and the happiness that we are living right now in this country. As you can see, we're going to be here for 48 hours in a tent because we believe that the sacrifice is worth it. That is, the sacrifice to defend the moment we are living is worth it. A moment of peace, a moment where everything will reopen, where there will be normality and we are ready to go out.
Brazil's inflation rate soared to an annualized high of 10.67% in October, highlighting challenges the central bank faces to rein in prices as citizens struggle to survive the fiscal crisis. The October inflation rate was the highest since the country's worst ever economic recession in 2016, said the country's National Statistics Agency, the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics. The institute data shows that price of daily necessities from water, electricity, and gas to food, beverage, and travel and dining services have significantly increased by 20 to 85% within a year. The latest data also shows that unemployment rate in Brazil still hovers at 13%, while the average annual income nationwide has fallen by 10% so far this year, the biggest drop since 2012.
I have to up my workload by 20% to 30% to make up for the inflation, at very least. But I am in the service sector. It's not that easy to find work these days.
And good news from Cuba. This Saturday, for the first time in 7 months, the island experienced a day without deaths caused by COVID-19, a very favorable scenario for the opening and starting on Monday 15th. In the midst of the intensification of the illegitimate sanctions applied by Washington against the island, they have been able to recover after an intense battle against the disease, which included a vaccination campaign with vaccines entirely produced in Cuba. On Saturday, Cuba reported only 293 new positive cases, which in the words of the Vice Minister of Health, represents a decrease of 19.1% less than the previous day. President Miguel Díaz-Canel, after recognizing that they have managed to control the pandemic, recalled that the challenge is to maintain that control hours before the country opens its border and children and teenagers return to schools. In Syria, the Ministry of Health received this Sunday a batch of 500,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccine donated by the People's Republic of China. The Ministry of Health, Hassan Al-Gobash, informed that the batch is part of the continuation of vaccines sent by the Chinese government that seeks to support the Arab country in the plan of immunization against the new coronavirus. The official also stressed that to the date, only 5% of the population has been vaccinated in the country. At the same time, the Chinese ambassador in Damascus said that the total amount of vaccines delivered to Syria amounts to 800,000 doses. It should be noted that the country is facing the pandemic with strong coercive and unilateral measures from the United States and the European Union, which hinders the purchase of vaccines. And we have more stories coming up after one last break, so stay tuned. Welcome back to From the South. Bulgarians went to the polls to elect a new parliament and a new president amid a surge of coronavirus infections. Around 6.7 million eligible voters hope that after inclusive general elections in April and July, the third attempt to elect 240 lawmakers will result in a government to lead the European Union's poorest member out of the health and economic crises. Analysts predict a low turnout on Sunday due to people's concerns over the spread of the coronavirus, the slow-moving vaccine uptake, and political apathy after two inconclusive elections. A low turnout would favor the former ruling GER party, which, despite a further erosion in support, can still count on many loyal voters and is likely to finish first. The general elections in Bulgaria also had expatriates voting from abroad in the parliamentary and presidential elections in their country this Saturday. Electoral authorities distributed 416 voting machines to the 280 overseas polling stations. The largest number of polling stations will be reopened in Turkey and the United Kingdom, with more than 100 on each in each country. More than 4,000 members of the Election Commission abroad, including almost 3,000 representatives of Bulgarian expatriates, will ensure that the election process runs smoothly and without any incidents. The Italian Coast Guard rescued over 300 young men and boys, mostly from Egypt, in heavy storms as their fishing boat floundered off the coast of Calabria Saturday night. In an operation that finished at dawn Sunday morning, the Coast Guard rescue team made three trips out to the fishing boat, where they transferred a group of migrants to the rescue boat and brought them to port barefoot, drenched, and shivering. The Calabrian coast has seen a surge of migrant arrivals in the past few months, but the region is still not equipped like the ports in Sicily to handle big numbers. The migrants were transferred to a recently built shelter with a capacity to hold 120 people. So far this year, over 50,000 migrants have arrived in Italy by sea.
At 1 a.m., we were advised that about 300 migrants could be arriving, so the Red Cross, along with other authorities that are responsible for handling the disembarkation on the pier, we activated and came down here to the port. We prepare, as well do all the time, not with all the protective gear. We welcome the migrants, giving the face masks, blankets, and other things they needed, and we'll transfer them to our tent structure.
Galmudug State in Somalia has elected the last two seats in the upper house, paving the way for the Horn of Africa country to kickstart the lower house vote. The state picked all its 8 senators who will represent in its 11th Somali federal parliament, becoming the final federal state to wrap up the election of the upper house that began in July. Abdi Hassan Awale had an easy win after his opponent, Awil Nur Ali, withdrew from the competition at the last minute. All 83 members of parliament voted in favor of the outgoing senator. Abdi Osman won the second seat in the same way after his rival candidate, Mahad Aden, dropped out of the race. He won all 83 votes available after lawmakers voted in a show of hands. The last two seats are the last of the 54 seats in the upper house, which are now filled, and the 5 federal states are expected to begin lower house voting in the coming days. COP26 ends with a Glasgow Pact, agreed after last-minute negotiations. The COP26 climate talks have agreed to get countries to strengthen their emissions cutting targets for 2030 by the end of the next year in a bid to limit dangerous warming. The Glasgow Pact was watered down at the last minute, following a push by India and China, prompting angry responses from European and vulnerable countries. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told young people, indigenous communities, and women leaders, all those leading the Climate Action Army, that he knew many of them were disappointed, and added that the approved texts from COP26 were a compromise that took important steps. But the collective political will was not enough to overcome some deep contradictions.
I think today we can say with credibility that we have kept 1.5 degrees within reach, but its pulse is weak. And it will only survive if we keep our promises, if we translate commitments into rapid action, and if we deliver on the expectations set out in this Glasgow Climate Pact to increase ambition to 2030 and beyond.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres said the world was still on the precipice of catastrophe after nations reached a global climate deal Saturday that fell short of what science says is needed to contain dangerous warming.
The approved texts are a compromise. They reflect the interests, the conditions, the contradictions, and the state of political will in the world today. They take important steps, but unfortunately, the collective political will was not enough to overcome some deep contradictions. As I said at the opening, we must accelerate action to keep the 1.5-degree goal alive. Our fragile planet is hanging by a thread. We are still knocking on the door of climate catastrophe. It's time to go into emergency mode, or our chance of reaching net zero will itself be zero.
Nicaragua was elected to serve as Vice President of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP26, representing Latin America and the Caribbean regions. The country's Vice Minister of Environment and Natural Resources, Javier Gutiérrez, was chosen unanimously for the position in recognition of the Central American nation's work in the fight against climate change and the national policies for the preservation of Mother Earth and climate justice. In his role as Vice President of the Board, Gutiérrez will support and oversee the fulfillment of the work program of the current presidency at COP26 Climate Conference, as well as the presidency of COP27 that will be assumed by Egypt in 2022. Nicaragua was also re-elected to continue representing the region on the Standing Committee on Finance at the Conference of the Parties. In Guatemala, heavy flooding affects homes, crops, and roads in several communities in the municipality of Chisec, Alta Verapaz. According to authorities of the National Coordinator for Disaster Reduction, the floods have greatly affected the rural communities of Carolina, Chubut, and Mukpila. They also informed that at the moment, the municipality officials are carrying out the pertinent evaluations to know the magnitude of the damages caused, and in the next few hours, they expect to provide details. These floods occurred 1 year after the passage of storms Eta and Iota in 2020, an event in which 61 people lost their lives and hundreds disappeared, and an event for which economic damages of around $750 million were also registered. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Santiago Loaiza. Thank you for watching.